Thank you, Alan. Well, you're all very welcome to this, the inaugural event of the 2013 CITA Technology Series. My name is Damien Duffy, and as Alan says, I'm a Senior Project Manager with the National Development Finance Agency. For those of you not familiar with the organisation, we are the financial advisor to government on all capital projects over 30 million. We're also the procuring and delivery authority for all PPP accommodation projects in the States rollout. We are here today sort of as the CITA's event partner, and that's a very good thing for us to do. We are of course very aware of the benefits of the BIM technologies have for us in the delivery and the design development, of course, of projects. But I think sort of where we are going this morning is to look at a more holistic approach, and that's really what BIM can offer and the technologies can offer us in the operational areas. This series follows a very successful series last year, where we had a great series of speakers covering quite a wide range but macro elements of BIM. And I'm looking forward this year to this year's series, which I think will give us greater insight and working in the BIM environment at sort of a hands-on level, and I think that's very important. In the NDFA, we are currently looking at the rollout of the government's recently announced stimulus package. This is a suite of PPP projects designed to stimulate growth in the economy, but it's also based on private investment. But here in the PPP projects, you have an arrangement that works as a greater collaboration between the delivery partners. Designers, constructors, facilities management and operators all work together to conceive the solution. And the contract is set up for 25 years. So there's a real commercial incentive to get the solutions that work. And in this environment, there's great opportunities for BIM. And BIM is a natural bedfellow there. And we see our partners there really sort of taking up the technology and driving it forward. And as we roll out the stimulus program this year, we are looking very carefully at what the operational requirements need to be. It's really here that the key benefits will be experienced in BIM. It's easy to see what happens in design and delivery. There's great benefits up front, but as a state client, we need to be more interested in how buildings and assets perform over their lifetime. And I'm very interested in Deborah's work at the moment. She has been working in the property unit in the Cabinet Office and has taken on board some very exciting challenges in terms of trying to find out where the efficiencies are and where those costs need to be driven out, and how that work fits and uses tools from the BIM technologies to deliver those savings. So Deborah, she's a very experienced individual. She's over 20 years in the field of facilities management. She's worked in supply chains as consultant and client in the area, both public and private. And we're very delighted to welcome you here this morning, Deborah, for your presentation. Just before I give the stage, the agenda for this morning will really be to take the presentation. We'll have some Q&A immediately after, but there are some questions on your tables, and we'll ask you for over the course of 15 minutes or so to discuss those questions amongst yourselves, and we'll stimulate some debate amongst the tables and with our speakers this morning on the subject areas there. So, Deborah, we'll hand up.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. You all seem to be at the back, so I'll be watching if you try and sneak out the back door. So hopefully you can hear me at the back. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, just a bit of background. My background is FM, and I'm here, and I'm glad that you've asked me to come here and talk about FM, because we have been, I've been working with the BIM team, and I know this is around BIM, but FM is a really important element of this, and the government has seen it as a really important element of this. So there's going to be 3 new letters that you're going to take away today, which is GSL, which is the government soft landings policy, which is wrapped around BIM, but I'll talk about that in a bit later. So BIM 1 year on. My colleague David Philps was here, we said about a year and a bit ago now. So we just wanted to give you a bit of an update on BIM. I'm not a BIM expert, but I've been working very closely with the BIM team, or BIMBOs as I like to call them. And they like that. And so hopefully I can give you an overview of where we are, where we've got to, and some of the lessons that we've been learning along the way. So just a bit of a reminder about the hypotheses of BIM, which I'm sure you know this well now. Government as a client can derive significant improvements in cost, value and carbon performance through the use of open, shareable asset information. So just keep that in your mind. So this is where we are at the moment, really. BIM policy was mandated to come into level 2 in 2016. Along with the government soft landing policy, which will also be in place in 2016, and all departments will need to follow that policy. The BIM growth strategy is really important. It's not just about BIM, though, it's about construction. It's about the industrial strategy. BIM is just part of that construction strategy and how we pull in growth in the UK construction sector. BIM's a very important part of that, but it's not just about BIM. Engagement with the industry and central government departments, that should be GECs. Construction Industry Council being very much involved in the whole of this process, and industry is very much involved. And clearly we have early adopters that are testing this, particularly in the form of MOJ, who have been, I'd like to say our guinea pig, but early adopter is a much better phrase. You know, one of the things that really will move this forward is about the EU procurement in Europe. We're hoping to see some BIM requirements come through in summer 2013, and UK and Holland have very much been leading on this. So the industry, lots of BIM 4 groups have been set up by David. He is quite prolific in this, as you can see, which has been really important in engaging the industry. It's not just about the government departments, it's about industry really getting involved. We have a BIM for SME group. I know SME is a big agenda for you. SME is a big agenda for the UK government in growth. But we also have private sector clients in the BIM for retail, where we've brought together all the main retail players in the UK, and they're working collaboratively together to come out with one process. We've got MBS and RICS and BIFM, particularly from the FM perspective, have written and published reports on BIM and government soft landings, and research suggests that UK is now number 2 in adopting policy in EMEA. However, Finland is number 1, so we've got a bit of catching up to do. I also want to mention the work of the Syria BIM Technology Alliance, have also been working very closely in this area. So this is our roadmap. This is where we started in 2012 with the government construction strategy, developing the MOJ pilot, developing the GSL policy and getting the GSL policy approved through the construction steering group and this construction board. So all government departments are on board. Now we're really in 2013, we're moving into the implementation phase. We need to make this happen. So lots of development work, lots of testing. MOJ have been leading the way on that. PAS 1192, I'll talk a bit more about that later. That's been developed, particularly for the CapEx side. And then we'll move forward into 2014, where we'll have more departments on board, really embedding BIM and GSL. COBE to CAFM data is absolutely key in this. Standardising the contractual link from construction to FM has got to be determined. So by 2015, we should have 100% of central government departments on board and BIM and GSL enabled. So that's a significant amount of work that we've got to do. Now, this is really around the client prize. BIM is not just about a 3D modelling tool, which has been a lot of discussion around what it can do, which is great. You know, it's a really important and powerful tool. But it's about what we get out of it at the end of it. And using BIM through wrapping around the government soft landing process, we will end up with a better business model and better business outcomes, because it's about mapping out what we actually need from those buildings or assets at the end. It's about making sure the client is engaged, that the FM engage early point in the construction and design to ensure that we get better outcomes. Sorry, to move that one on a bit, a few buttons there. The value proposition is really key to us. We need to have a greater understanding of the entire life cycle of the process. This is where BIM really comes into play, and we can really use the benefits of BIM to map out the life cycle. We can unlock that operational life cycle by better decisions up front, better decisions by using the 3D modelling tools. This will give us a much better value proposition at the end. So some of the elements that we've been working on in the process deliverables, there's a number of things here. Obviously the 3D model, which you're all used to in the top right-hand corner. PAS 1192, this has been developed for CapEx. It will be launched in February by the BIM task group, who have bought the licence from the British standards. So it will be free to download, and it will give you a tool set. We're now working on PAS 1192.3, which looks at the OPEX side of it. And that's about managing data to level 2 BIM. The BIM information manager is being defined. 2D design obviously still very much part of it. The COBE data set, now Alan asked me to explain COBE to those that may not know it, and I'm not actually a technical expert in this. It actually stands for Communication Operation Building Information Exchange, COBE for short, which is easier. It basically means it has the ability to move data from one place to another in a standard format, and its lowest common denominator is the Excel spreadsheet. So that means there's no barriers to entry in using it. So MOJ, they've been testing the BIM, the level 2 model, so let me take you through what they've done and the lessons learned so far. Now this looks very complicated, but they basically had a couple of workshops where they mapped out the whole process, the whole design and construction process, which is the bit along the bottom. Which looks very interesting. They had a technical and a procurement workshop, and what they did through that workshop, they drove out the waste and duplication on the areas that they worked on. So they worked collaboratively across their teams to become an intelligent client, and this was what it was all about. So this is about people and process, not necessarily the BIM technology. This is about mapping out the process, mapping out who does what and when they do it, and when does the information come into play. The information in those little boxes down here is the information required at certain stages of the design and construction process. They mapped out what would they need at what stage. Don't quite see them on there, but the red milestones are the key decision points, and the green dots, which I don't think you can see, they're the COBE data drops, and when they need that COBE information to be fed into the BIM model. So they really worked it through. So their lessons learned on their first project, which was Cook and Wood, which was a new house block for a prison. Basically, their lessons learned were that you can drive out value when you take 3D and you walk it through with the client. They had a massive, really good example of this, where they walked the client through that model. The client then said, I actually don't need security gates there, and actually I don't need that. That came out with £800,000 worth of savings. That would never have happened because that would have been built. But we walked the client through what it looked like, and that was really important. Don't ask for too much data. The files became far too large and very unmanageable. So I think that's a lesson learnt for all of us. Ensure you have the security settings for the IT to work. They had a big issue with that, particularly around government and particularly around prisons. Engage the contractor early. And engage the FM early. These were their practical lessons they actually tried and tested. This little picture on the right-hand side is a duct, apparently. And basically they have 180 of them in each project or in a standard project. By bringing in the FM team early, the FM team identified that they could adapt the design for better accessibility and maintenance going forward. So the ongoing result was savings again on the operational cost going forward. So this is it in practice. This is about the operational costs. So let's think about those early and think about them up front. This is just about a bit more about their process. The BIM library elements are the bits at the top. They've standardised them now, so that they've got a nice standard briefing pack because they use a lot of standard components for their buildings. The cost component, the part in the centre is about the cost component breakdown. When they studied this, the biggest part at the bottom, the blue part, is the product cost. And everything else was the fees being charged on top to get to that product cost. So really, they needed to reduce those fees and all the information input that's going up the top end in order so they could spend actually more money on the product at the bottom end. But they can only do this by really detailing when they need that information and who needs that information, and this is where also BIM comes into play. The COBE data migrated into CAFM as well. The CAFM, the Computer Aided Facilities Management System, is absolutely key in this. And we need the CAFM people to really grasp this because it's an absolute opportunity for them. You know, most FM is operated through a CAFM or an asset management system of some sort. And normally, when you get a building handed over to you, you're just landed with a whole load of files, data files. Sometimes you get them in electronic format if you're really lucky. That can take at least 6 months to load that data, and you don't know if it's accurate and up to date. Getting the BIM model and the COBE straight into CAFM saves a lot of time and wastage, and actually you've got the information straight away. So government soft landings, what is that all about? It's part of the government construction strategy. It's one of the elements that we really need to look about pulling together the operation, maintenance, life cycle side of construction into FM and the ongoing operation and life cycle of buildings. It's based on the BIS-RIA soft landing frameworks. We haven't reinvented the wheel, but we've called it government soft landings just because we had a few tweaks that we needed to make that were suitable for us. So customers were not getting the assets and the outcomes that they needed or wanted. We often had the case of the passing the baton with the big gaps in the middle. The handovers are not great. We know we've got buildings that don't do what they want to do. We've got assets that don't work in the way they need to work because the right people have not been involved in the right stages. So we've got a statement here, Geocell powered by BIM, and that's an important thing. We've pulled the two together. Geocell is now very much part of the whole BIM task group. They're not separate entities, they're one and the same thing. To champion better outcomes for our built assets during the design and construction stages through government soft landings, powered by a building information model to ensure the value is achieved in the operational life cycle of an asset. Okay, all lovely words, so what do we actually mean by that? So collaboration is key. This is an opportunity for our industry to really work together. We've traditionally worked in silos. I've worked in the silos within those industries at construction, property, FM. We don't work as one. We don't work as one in government, in our government departments. So we're starting to pull that together. But industry has a very big opportunity here to bring that together, particularly some of the large construction stroke FM firms that have both those elements in their field. We also need to make sure that we bring the operational costs forward in the design phase. CapEx is obviously a key one that's always talked about, but you know, when we look at the CapEx and the CapEx cost of a building, the operational cost of running that building far outweighs the cost of the original capital investment, but everyone forgets that. So CapEx and OpEx, we call it TOTEX now. Let's have it up front. We really need to know the operational costs up front. So when we make those design decisions, any impacts on those operational costs are considered and not just left to the last minute. The full potential of BIM holds in delivering value and cost saving over the whole project life cycle. This is substantial, and this is where the real benefits will come out. So the golden thread. GSL will be a key element of the design and construction process, maintaining the golden thread of the building purpose. I'm talking about buildings because that's my background, but it also applies to assets and infrastructure, through to delivery and operation. It's really important that we have everyone in the right places at the right time, and that we have the right people making the right decisions, using what we're calling a GSL champion, which is someone from the estates team. They're already within the organisations, or in the private sector, that could be an FM operation. Early engagement of the end user and inclusion of the GSL champion of the project team during the design and construction process, combined with BIM to provide a fully populated asset data set to feed into the CAFM systems, and modelling will enable planning modifications. This data will need to be maintained through the building life cycle. Another true benefit of the BIM model after you've got it up and running and your building is in that position, or your assets in that position, is that, and this is particularly around buildings, where we know up to 3 years we start to change the use, we start to churn, we start to do lots of things with those buildings. We can start planning how those changes impact those life cycle costs by using the BIM model. This is and redesigning the BIM model and taking the client through the walkthrough again. So it's really important that that's kept up to date. And this is going to be an interesting scenario where we tie this into the FM contracts. Post-occupancy evaluation will be used as a collaborative tool to measure and optimise asset performance and embed lessons learned. POE, lots of stuff done on POE. Lots of people have tried to get to a standard point on this. What we need to do for the UK government is get to a standard measurement toolkit. We know where we are with the kind of utilities and waste. We're pretty much going to use TM22. However, what we also need to measure is the building use. And we've got to come up with a standard POE for that. So how does it feel like at the end of it? Has it done what it needed to do? Does it do what it says on the tin? So those measures have yet to be standardised. We're talking to BSI and we're going to come up with a British standard on that, because there has been a lot in this area and we really need to get to a point where we're all talking the same measures. And the measures are key. Those measures need to go up front in the construction contract. So we've got some key measures that are then measured in the FM contract going forward. So there's a bit of a contractual tie-up here which we need to develop as well. And that's going to be something that we've really got to work on. So the opportunity, the collaborative working through the supply chain, construction, design, FM throughout the project life cycle. Let's start working together. This is a real opportunity for our industry to really get our act together. Operational input and challenge to the construction and design to ensure that operational costs are maintained and the impact of the change assessed. And the MOJ example has been a classic one in that. BIM provides a fully populated asset data set into the CAFM systems and therefore reducing the time wasted in obtaining and populated asset information, which they have to do. And the 3D modelling will assist with the ongoing planning modifications to the use and the impact of the asset life cycle. This is a bit of a diagram to explain. We've got 4 key measures which we will go, or 4 key areas that we're going to measure and monitor. 3 of them are measures and 1 of them is really about a process. So the measures that we really are going to put in place, and this is from the early stages all the way through design and post-occupancy, and then the lessons of those fed back. So the environmental measures, the financial measurement, which is the OPEX, the FM commissioning, training and handover. This is much more about the process and making sure the right people are involved in the right timing and bringing them on early. And the functionality and effectiveness is, what do we get at the end of it? Does it do what it needs to do? All of that needs to go through the whole BIM process, which is mapped into the plan of works using the COBE data drops. This is where it's all tied up. I've got a bit of a car analogy that I like to use. We quite often buy buildings or have buildings built for us, yet we actually don't know their running costs and their operational costs. We would never do that. If you went out and bought a car, you look at the tax, you look at the insurance, you look at how much miles per gallon they do. So when you make those decisions and those purchases, you consider the operational running costs of those capital purchases as an individual, yet we don't do it on these significant spends on buildings and assets. So that's where we've got to really change the mindset. So the next steps for GSL. We've just set up the BIM for FM, another BIM 4 group, industry group. This has got all the key industry players in the UK, so RICS, BIFM, SIBSI, BISRIA. REBA have also wanted to be involved, which I think is a really good thing because it starts to bring that group together. And this is about really developing a brief for FM and the operators to really understand what BIM means to them, because there's been a lot of talk around BIM. I call it BIM wash. And actually the FM and the operators really need to understand what does it mean, because they're going to be the ones that are going to manage it and take it forward. So that BIM for FM industry group really is about setting up those industry standards and understanding the communication back to the industry. COBE to CAFM, this is developing a standard data set. How is that COBE going to feed into the CAFM systems? We've got a number of trial projects ongoing where we're testing quite a lot of this at the moment. Standardise the post-occupancy evaluation methods. We really need to get to do that. The early adopters and the Geocell champions, we've got a number of projects that we're working with industry and various public sector areas to look at all these areas and really test it and feed back what we've learned. Guidance documents on how to apply BIM and GSL, that's what we're working on at the moment. And the contractual link, this is a real tie-up piece. This is the bit we've really got to work on, and we're testing it again with a few virtual projects where we're overlaying a contractual setup that we might put into place. And this is really where we put the measures into the construction contract of what we're trying to measure post-occupancy. But knowing that post-occupancy, that was likely to be done by the FM operator, who may or may not be the same company or organisation. So we need to make sure there's no gaps there and there's no blame culture in the middle. So when we get those measures, and if it doesn't do what it should have done from those primary measures that we've put in place in the construction contract, we've actually got a remedy to come back to the constructor and the designer and say, actually, this doesn't do what we said it was doing. We've never been able to tie that up before. There's a number of different ways we can approach this, and we're testing the various ways that we may approach this. But that's going to be quite a shift for industry and how we do that. And clearly what we don't want to happen in that, particularly for the SMEs, that we push the cost of this down to the SME supply chain. So that's very much at the forefront of our mind. We've also got to develop what we call GSL for infrastructure, which is just a slightly different take. We've written it around buildings, but it actually needs to apply to infrastructure as well. So we're going to work with IC on developing it specifically for infrastructure. We also need to bear in mind that everything that we do needs to apply to large refurbishments, not just new builds. Particularly government in the UK, we're going to be sweating our assets. So there's going to be a lot more large refurbishments that are going to need to be applied than actually new builds. And that's the bit that we've got to work through as well. How do we then get that BIM information from an existing building stock? Laser scanning is getting a lot cheaper, so we're really going to have to look at that side of things as well. Before I open up the questions, I was asked by Alan to think about what advice I'd give to the Irish government. So I've got three things. One, strong leadership is needed to push this agenda forward. We've been very lucky that we've had Paul Morrell leading the helm on this, who's been excellent at driving the agenda for government. And we now have Peter Hansford, who's the new Chief Construction Advisor, to actually drive it into an implementation phase. So strong leadership is key. My second one is don't look at BIM in isolation. It needs to be part of a much bigger picture. It needs to be part of the construction strategy and the industry for growth plan. And finally, with my FM hat on, don't forget about the government soft landings and the life cycle part. It's integral to actually making this happen, and this is where the true benefits lie. Open to questions.